You think your silence is a shield, boy? In my courtroom, silence is just a confession waiting to be beaten out of you. Judge Magnus Fairchild's voice cracked like a whip across the mahogany-paneled room, his face a mask of sweating, scarlet fury. "I didn't do it!" The scream tore from the defendant's throat, raw and desperate, bouncing off the indifferent faces of the jury. "Order! One more outburst and I will have you bound and gagged like the animal you are proving to be," Magnus roared, bringing the gavel down with a violence that made the wood splinter. Bang! Bang! The sound echoed like gunshots, sealing a fate that had been decided long before the trial began. Justice wasn't blind here. It was bought, sold, and looking for blood. The air in Judge Magnus Fairchild's private chambers smelled of aged leather, pipe tobacco, and the distinct metallic scent of absolute power. Outside, the humid Georgia heat pressed against the courthouse like a physical weight, but inside, the air conditioning hummed a low, cool hymn to the elite. Magnus swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, staring out the window at the town of Oakhaven. From up here, the people looked like ants. His ants. He adjusted the collar of his silk robe, not the black judicial one, but the burgundy smoking jacket he preferred for his strategy sessions. "The polls are tightening, Magnus," said Lucian Carrington, the district attorney. Lucian was a man of sharp angles and sharper suits, pacing the Persian rug with the nervous energy of a predator who hadn't eaten in days. The tough-on-crime narrative needs fresh meat. The public is getting bored with petty drug busts. They want a monster, and they want us to slay him. Magnus took a slow sip, letting the expensive scotch coat his throat. "Boredom is dangerous, Lucian. Boredom leads to scrutiny, and scrutiny leads to unearthing things best left buried." He turned, his eyes, cold, blue chips of ice, fixing on the younger man. "So, find me a monster." "We don't have one," Lucian admitted, stopping his pacing to lean against the heavy oak desk. "The homicide rate is down. Ironically, the streets are quiet." "Then we make the streets speak," Magnus said, his voice a low rumble. He opened a manila folder on his desk, sliding a black and white surveillance photo across the polished surface. "I saw this one yesterday near the docks. New in town. Keeps to himself. Muscles like corded steel, drives a beat-up '69 Chevelle. He looks volatile." Lucian picked up the photo. It showed a tall, dark-skinned man in a grease-stained t-shirt, working under the hood of a car. His face was obscured by shadow, but the posture was rigid, disciplined. "Who is he?" "Name's Alias Westmore. Mechanic, drifter, pays cash. No local family, no connections to the town council, no church group to rally for him." Magnus recited the details with a predator's satisfaction. "A ghost, perfect for haunting." "And the crime?" "The robbery at the jewelry exchange last week. The guard is still in a coma. He won't be waking up to contradict us. We pin the robbery and the assault on Mr. Westmore. We plant the jewels. We find the weapon." Magnus smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "We give the people their villain, Lucian. You get your conviction stats. I get my re-election secured as the protector of Oakhaven, and Mr. Westmore gets 20 to life in the state pen." Lucian frowned, studying the picture. "He looks hard, not the jittery junkie type we usually roll over. He's a nobody, Lucian. And in my courtroom, nobodies don't fight back. They suffocate." Magnus finished his drink and slammed the glass down. "Call Detective Vance. Tell him to pay our new mechanic a visit. Make sure they find something damning. I want this arraignment by Friday." Magnus turned back to the window, watching the unsuspecting town below. He felt like a god moving pieces on a board, completely unaware that the pawn he had just selected was actually the king in disguise. He didn't know that Alias Westmore wasn't just a mechanic. He didn't know that the man in the photo had more confirmed kills in the line of duty than the entire Oakhaven police force combined, or that he was the section chief of the FBI's elite public corruption task force. Magnus thought he was hunting a rabbit. He had just stepped into the cage with a tiger. The garage was sweltering. The smell of oil, gasoline, and hot metal was a perfume Alias Westmore had grown to appreciate over the last 3 months. It was the scent of honesty, unlike the stench of the bureaucracy he usually waded through in D.C. He wiped his hands on a rag, his dark eyes scanning the perimeter of the shop through the reflection in the Chevelle's chrome bumper. He had been waiting for this. The intel from his handler, Thalia Cross, deep undercover in the clerk's office, suggested that Fairchild was getting desperate. The judge needed a win. Alias had positioned himself as the perfect victim, solitary, imposing, and black, in a town where the power structure was aggressively white. He heard the crunch of gravel before he saw the cruiser. No sirens, just the heavy, deliberate roll of tires. Alias didn't flinch. He leaned back into the engine bay, tightening a spark plug that didn't need tightening. His heart rate remained a steady 55 beats per minute. "Alias Westmore!" The shout came from Detective Vance, a man whose gut hung over his belt and whose eyes held the dull shine of a bully who had never been punched back. He was flanked by 2 uniforms, their hands resting on their holsters. Alias straightened slowly, putting the wrench down on the fender with a deliberate clink. He wiped his hands again, turning to face them. "Can I help you, officers?" "Hands where I can see 'em," Vance barked, stepping into the shade of the garage. "You own this vehicle?" "I do," Alias said, his voice deep and calm. "Restoration project." "We got an anonymous tip," Vance sneered, spitting a glob of tobacco juice onto the concrete floor near Alias's boot. "Says you fit the description of the perp involved in the jewelry exchange heist. Says you might be holding stolen goods." "I've been here all day," Alias said, keeping his hands raised to shoulder height. "Check the security cam across the street." "Camera's broken," Vance said, his grin widening. "Convenient for you. Pop the trunk." Alias moved to the back of the car. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He had watched Vance's partner, a nervous rookie named Miller, circle around the passenger side while Vance distracted him. He had heard the soft thud of a magnetic box being attached to the wheel well, or perhaps something slid through the open window. It was sloppy tradecraft. Amateur hour. Alias opened the trunk. It was empty, save for a jack and a spare tire. "Check the interior," Vance ordered Miller. Miller dove into the back seat. 10 seconds later, he emerged, holding a velvet pouch and a snub-nosed .38 revolver. "Found it, boss. Stuffed under the driver's seat." Alias stared at the gun. It was a plant, obvious and crude, but he widened his eyes, feigning shock. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before." "Save it for the judge," Vance said, tackling Alias against the car. He slammed Alias's face into the hot metal, twisting his arm behind his back with unnecessary force. Alias could have dislocated Vance's shoulder, swept Miller's leg, and disarmed the third officer in under 3 seconds. His muscles coiled instinctively, a lifetime of combat training screaming to be unleashed. But he forced his body to go limp. He had to be the victim. He had to let the system swallow him whole so he could tear it apart from the inside. "You're making a mistake," Alias said, his voice straining as the cuffs bit into his wrists. "The only mistake was you coming to my town, boy," Vance whispered in his ear, hot breath smelling of stale coffee. "You're under arrest for armed robbery and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, Alias caught his reflection in the window. He didn't look scared. He looked focused. He watched the garage recede into the distance as they drove away. In his pocket, his burner phone had been recording the entire encounter. But that was just insurance. The real evidence would come from the man waiting for him at the top of the food chain. Judge Fairchild wanted a show. Alias was going to give him a performance that would bring the house down. The holding cell was a concrete box designed to break the spirit. It smelled of urine, bleach, and despair. Alias sat on the metal bench, his back straight, eyes closed. He wasn't sleeping. He was filing away details. The guard shift rotation, every 4 hours. The blind spots in the hallway cameras, the whisper of other inmates discussing which public defender was a drunk and which was a sellout. 3 days had passed since the arrest. They had denied him a phone call for the first 24 hours, a violation of procedure that he mentally logged. When he finally got his call, he dialed a number that technically didn't exist. He let it ring twice, hung up, dialed again, let it ring once, and hung up. The signal was sent. Washington knew the operation was live. He was on his own now until the trap snapped shut. "Westmore? Court time?" A guard banged on the bars. Alias stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in his orange jumpsuit. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles, forced to shuffle through the underground tunnel that connected the jail to the courthouse. The courtroom was packed. It was a spectacle. The media was there, cameras hungry for the jewelry store bandit. In the front row, he saw a woman, Kiara Monroe. She was the wife of the security guard currently in a coma. Her eyes were red, filled with a mixture of grief and hatred as she looked at him. Alias felt a pang of genuine guilt. He was using her tragedy to catch a monster, but that didn't change the fact that her pain was real. "I will get justice for you, Kiara," he vowed silently. "Real justice." He was led to the defense table. Sitting there, shuffling through papers with frantic energy, was Gemma Barrett. Gemma was young, her suit was cheap, and she looked exhausted. She was the only public defender in Oakhaven who hadn't been completely bought by the Fairchild machine, which meant she was overworked and underpaid. "Mr. Westmore," she whispered, not looking up. "I'm Gemma Barrett. I've been assigned your case. Look, it's bad. They found the gun and the jewels in your car. Vance's report is tight." "The report is a lie," Alias said calmly. "I believe you," Gemma said, and she stopped shuffling to look at him. Her eyes were hazel, intelligent, and fierce. "I actually do. Vance is dirty as a pigsty. But believing you and proving it are different things. Judge Fairchild is presiding. I know. He doesn't lose, Alias. He uses bail hearings to crush defendants. He's going to set it so high you'll rot in jail until trial, and then he'll pressure you into a plea deal just to make it stop." "Let him try," Alias said. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The door behind the bench swung open, and Magnus Fairchild swept in. He looked every bit the Southern aristocrat, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his robe flowing like royal vestments. He climbed the steps to the bench and sat down, surveying the courtroom with a look of supreme boredom. "Docket number 4592, the clerk announced. State of Georgia versus Alias Westmore. Charges of armed robbery, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon." Magnus looked down at Alias over the rim of his reading glasses. "Mr. Carrington, how does the state wish to proceed?" Lucian Carrington stood up, buttoning his expensive Italian suit. "Your Honor, this was a brutal, calculated attack on a pillar of our community. The defendant was caught with the stolen merchandise and the weapon used in the crime. He has no ties to the community and is a flight risk. The state requests bail be denied." Magnus hummed, pretending to consider. "Ms. Barrett?" Gemma stood, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength as she spoke. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. The evidence was found in a vehicle that had been unattended in an open garage for hours. There are no fingerprints on the weapon linking it to Mr. Westmore. To deny bail on circumstantial evidence is a violation of his Eighth Amendment rights." Magnus let out a short, dry laugh. "Circumstantial? The gun was under his seat, Ms. Barrett. Did the gun walk there?" "Someone put it there," Alias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. The courtroom went silent. Magnus's eyes narrowed. "You will speak only when spoken to, defendant." "I'm speaking to the injustice in this room," Elias said, meeting Magnus's gaze. He didn't blink. And I'm wondering why the serial number on the gun in the evidence bag doesn't match the caliber of the bullet retrieved from the victim. Lucien froze. Gemma whipped her head around to look at Alias. Magnus leaned forward, his face darkening. What did you say? I read the police report upside down on my counsel's desk. Alias lied smoothly. He hadn't. He had memorized the ballistics report Thalia had hacked into the night before. The victim was shot with a .38 special. The gun Vance found is a .38, yes, but the barrel rifling described in the initial forensics doesn't match a snub nose. It matches a 4-inch barrel. That is speculation, Lucien sputtered, looking at Vance, who was turning a distinct shade of purple in the back of the room. Magnus slammed the gavel down. Bang! Enough, Magnus roared. I will not have a robbery suspect lecturing this court on ballistics. You are dangerously close to contempt, Mr. Westmore. And you are dangerously close to a mistrial, Your Honor, Alias retorted. The gasps from the gallery were audible. Nobody spoke to Magnus Fairchild that way. Not if they wanted to see the sun again. Magnus smiled, but it was the smile of a shark about to feed. A mistrial? No, son. We don't make mistakes here. We make examples. He leaned into the microphone. Bail is set at $5 million cash. Remand to the county jail until trial. Get him out of my sight. Gemma slumped in her chair, defeated. I told you, she whispered. He just buried you. Alias stood as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. He looked at Magnus, who was already turning to chat with the court clerk, dismissing Alias as nothing more than debris. 5 million, Alias thought. Good. The higher the bail, the harder the fall. As they dragged him away, Alias caught the eye of the court clerk, Thalia Cross. She gave a microscopic nod. She had the transcript. She had the audio of Magnus's bias. The first brick had been laid in the wall that would imprison Magnus Fairchild. But the hardest part was yet to come. Alias had to survive the county jail, a place run by Vance's friends, while Magnus and Lucien realized that their perfect patsy was starting to ask questions that only a professional would know to ask. The hunter had entered the trap willingly, but the jaws were sharper than even he had anticipated. The Oak Haven County Jail was not a correctional facility. It was a storage locker for human misery. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, industrial cleaner, and fear. Alias Westmore sat on the bottom bunk of his cell in Block D, the section reserved for violent offenders. It was where Judge Fairchild sent the men he wanted to disappear. Alias knew this because he had spent the last 48 hours listening. He listened to the rhythmic clanging of doors, the whispered transactions of contraband, and the stories of men serving 20 years for crimes that should have carried a suspended sentence. You're quiet for a dead man, a voice rasped from the top bunk. It was Sledge, a meth-head biker with rotting teeth and a swastika tattooed on his neck. I'm not dead yet, Alias replied, his eyes fixed on the graffiti scratched into the wall opposite him. Fairchild is the devil, one carving read. Vance came by during chow, Sledge laughed, a wet hacking sound. Put a carton of cigarettes and a steak dinner on your head. Said the new guy needs to be socialized before trial. Alias didn't move. He had expected this. Vance couldn't risk Alias making it to the preliminary hearing with more questions about ballistics. A prison stabbing would be ruled a gang dispute, and the case would be closed. You going to try to collect, Sledge? Alias asked softly. Sledge swung his legs down, dropping to the floor. He was big but slow. Steak is hard to come by in here. 2 other inmates, massive men with dead eyes, appeared at the cell door. The guard at the end of the hall was conveniently looking the other way. The electronic lock on the cell door buzzed and clicked open. A malfunction, or a courtesy. Alias stood up slowly. He rolled his neck, feeling the tension pop. Gentlemen, I'm going to give you one chance to walk away. The 3 men rushed him. It was over in 12 seconds. Sledge swung a crude shank made from a sharpened toothbrush. Alias sidestepped with fluid grace, catching Sledge's wrist and twisting it until the bone snapped with a sickening crack. He used Sledge's momentum to throw him into the second attacker, sending them both crashing into the metal toilet. The third man, a giant named Tiny, hesitated. Alias stepped into his space, driving a palm strike into the man's solar plexus, followed by a precise, debilitating chop to the carotid artery. Tiny dropped like a stone, gasping for air. Alias stood over them, barely breathing hard. The cell block had gone silent. Every inmate was pressed against their bars, watching. Alias crouched down next to Sledge, who was whimpering, clutching his broken wrist. Alias picked up the shank. "Vance sent you," Alias whispered, his voice low and terrifying. "Tell me." Yeah, it was Vance," Sledge cried out. "He said you were a snitch, said you had to bleed." Alias stood up and walked to the open cell door. He looked at the guard station. The guard, a corrupt crony named Miller, was staring, mouth open. Alias held up the shank, then dropped it. "Tell Vance his delivery was returned," Alias called out. He turned back to the cell block, addressing the silent audience. "Listen to me. Fairchild and Vance put you in here to rot while they get rich. They use you as currency. I am not your enemy. I am the man who is going to burn their kingdom down." A murmur went through the block. It wasn't hope yet, but it was interest. Alias walked back to his bunk and sat down. He had established dominance. Now, he had an army to recruit. But as the adrenaline faded, he felt the vibration of the burner phone he had managed to smuggle in, taped to the inside of his thigh, buzz once. Message from Thalia. "Gemma is digging. They are watching her. Be ready." Gemma Barrett's office was a broom closet compared to the mahogany suites of the district attorney, but tonight it felt like a war room. Files were stacked in teetering towers on her desk. Half-eaten takeout containers littered the floor. She rubbed her eyes, staring at the inventory manifest from the jewelry exchange. Alias's words in the courtroom had haunted her. The gun didn't match. The rifling was wrong. If Alias was right about that, what else were they lying about? She picked up the insurance claim filed by the jewelry store owner, a man named Saul Berkowitz. The claim was for $3 million in loose diamonds. $3 million, she muttered. For a store in a strip mall that barely does $50,000 a year in sales? It didn't add up. She cross-referenced the serial numbers of the stolen diamonds listed in the police report with a national database of insured gems. It was a long shot, something public defenders rarely had the time or resources to do. A knock on her door made her jump. "Who is it?" she called out, her heart hammering. "Court services, late filing," a muffled female voice replied. Gemma unlocked the door. A woman in a trench coat slipped inside quickly, locking the door behind her. It was the court clerk, the quiet one who always sat near the judge. Thalia Cross. "Ms. Cross? What are you doing here?" Gemma asked, stepping back. Thalia didn't smile. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the desk. "You're looking in the wrong place, Gemma. It's not just insurance fraud, it's laundering." "What?" "Berkowitz doesn't own those diamonds," Thalia said, her voice hushed. "Lucian Carrington does. He uses the jewelry store to clean dirty campaign money. They fake a robbery, claim the insurance on inflated values, and the stolen stones are sold on the black market in Miami. Double the profit." Gemma stared at the flash drive. How do you know this?" "Because I'm not just a clerk," Thalia said, her eyes intense. "And Alias Westmore isn't just a mechanic." Gemma felt the room spin. "Who is he?" "That's not important right now. What's important is that flash drive contains the real inventory logs. The diamonds found in Alias's car? They're paste, replicas used for display. If you get an independent appraiser to test them before the trial, the prosecution's case falls apart. And if you trace the insurance payout, it leads to a shell corporation in the Caymans registered to Lucian's wife. This gets us all killed," Gemma whispered, realizing the scale of the monster she was fighting. Or it saves an innocent man and cleans up this city, Thalia countered. Judge Fairchild signed off on the warrant for Alias's arrest, knowing the evidence was planted. He gets a cut of the insurance payout. It's a closed loop, Gemma. Judge, jury, and executioner. Thalia moved to the door. Alias is holding his own inside, but they won't let him live to see a trial if they panic. You need to file a motion to test the evidence. Tomorrow morning, force their hand. Wait, Gemma said, grabbing Thalia's arm. Why trust me? Because you're the only one in this town who hasn't looked away, Thalia said. She slipped out into the night, leaving Gemma alone with the evidence that could bring down the most powerful men in Georgia. Gemma looked at the flash drive. Her hands were shaking. She thought about her student loans, her beat-up car, her fear. Then she thought about Alias, standing in that courtroom, defying a tyrant. She plugged the drive in. He did what? Magnus Fairchild stood by the fireplace in his home, crushing his unlit pipe in his hand. The news from the jail had just arrived via a terrified phone call from Warden Miller. Lucian Carrington sat on the velvet sofa, looking pale. He broke Sledge's wrist and knocked out 2 others in under 20 seconds. Miller says he moved like a machine. And then he made a speech. The inmates are listening to him, Magnus. Block D is quiet, too quiet. He's a mechanic, Magnus spat. He fixes transmissions. He doesn't disable 300 pounds of meth-fueled muscle. I ran the background check again, Lucien said, his voice trembling. I called a favor from a buddy at the NSA, just to see if Westmore had a military record we missed. And? The file is blocked, Magnus. It's not empty. It's sealed. Level 5 clearance required. When I tried to push through, the system flagged my IP and kicked me out. Lucien looked up, terror in his eyes. Mechanics don't have level 5 sealed files. We messed up. We grabbed the wrong drifter. Magnus walked to the window, staring at his reflection. For the first time in 20 years, he felt a flicker of genuine fear. If Westmore was intelligence, or special forces, or something worse, then this wasn't a frame-up. It was a sting. If he's a Fed, Magnus whispered, he's here for the corruption, the laundering, the kickbacks. We have to cut him loose, Lucian said, standing up. Drop the charges. Say it was a mistake. Let him go. You idiot! Magnus spun around, his face purple. If we let him go, he walks out of here and indicts us both. We've already arrested him. We've arraigned him. The only way out is through. What are you saying? I'm saying the trial is in 3 days. But Mr. Westmore isn't going to make it to court. Magnus's eyes were cold, dead things. He's in a violent ward. Accidents happen. Fires happen. Riots happen. Magnus, you're talking about assassinating a federal agent, if that's what he is. I'm talking about survival, Magnus roared. Call Vance. Tell him to empty the isolation wing. We're moving Westmore to solitary confinement tonight for his protection after the fight. And then? And then, Magnus said, smoothing his silk robe. The security cameras in solitary will malfunction, and Detective Vance will pay a visit to Mr. Westmore. Personally. No witnesses, no inmates. Just a tragic suicide in a lonely cell. Lucian swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll make the call. At the hospital across town, the machines beeped rhythmically next to the bed of Henry Simmons, the security guard. His wife, Kiara, sat by his side, holding his hand. Alias had promised he wasn't the one who did this. Kiara had wanted to hate him in the courtroom, but the way he looked at her, the way he challenged the judge, it planted a seed of doubt. Suddenly, Henry's fingers twitched. Kiara gasped. Henry? Henry's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused, milky with medication, but they were open. He groaned, trying to speak through the tube in his throat. Nurse! Nurse! Kiara screamed, hitting the call button. In the hallway, a man in scrubs, who was definitely not a nurse, paused. He adjusted his surgical mask, checking the text message on his phone. It was from a blocked number. Subject waking up. Silence him. The assassin slipped a syringe from his pocket and moved toward the room. But just as he reached the door, a hand clamped onto his shoulder. A hand heavy as lead. "Can I help you, pal?" The assassin turned to see a man in a trench coat standing there. He was older, scarred, with the look of a man who had seen too many wars. It was Agent Miller, no relation to the cop, part of Alias's task force. He had been stationed at the hospital 24/7 since the operation began. "Just checking vitals," the assassin stammered. "Wrong room," the agent said, opening his coat slightly to reveal a suppressed Glock. "Walk away, or we do this right here." The assassin paled and hurried down the hall. Inside the room, Henry Simmons blinked, focusing on his wife. He pulled at the tube, his eyes wide with panic. The doctor rushed in, removing the tube carefully. "Henry, baby, it's okay," Kiara sobbed. "You're safe." Henry grabbed her arm, his voice a rasping croak. "Not him." Kiara froze. "What? The black man in the news?" Henry wheezed, tears leaking from his eyes. "Not him. It was Vance. Vance shot me." Kiara's world shattered. The detective investigating the crime was the shooter. Back in the jail, the heavy steel door of Alias's cell slid open with a buzz. "Westmore, roll up," Deputy Miller shouted. "You're moving to solitary." Alias stood slowly. He knew what this meant. Solitary was where they took you when they didn't want witnesses. The timeline had accelerated. Magnus was making his move. As he walked out of the cell, Sledge, nursing his broken arm, looked up from the floor. He gave Alias a nod of respect. Alias was shackled and marched down the long concrete corridor. He was led deep into the bowels of the prison, to the hole. The air here was stagnant. The lights were flickering. They shoved him into a tiny windowless cell and slammed the door. The lock engaged with a final heavy thud. Alias stood in the dark. He waited. 10 minutes passed. Then the lights in the hallway buzzed and died. Total darkness. The electronic lock on his door clicked. It didn't lock. It unlocked. The door creaked open a fraction of an inch. From the darkness of the corridor, he heard the distinct sound of a slide being racked on a service pistol. "End of the line, Fed," Vance's voice echoed from the shadows. Alias smiled in the dark. He didn't retreat to the corner. He stepped toward the door. "You're right, Vance," Alias said, his voice calm, echoing off the concrete. "It is the end." The isolation wing of the Oak Haven County Jail was a monument to the town's indifference toward its condemned. The air, heavy with the metallic scent of old fear and ozone from the faulty wiring, settled thick and cold. In Alias Westmore's cell, the darkness was an unblinking total void, save for the faint, silvery light leaking under the jammed steel door. This was where secrets went to die. Alias stood perfectly still, breathing through his nose, his senses functioning as finely tuned instruments. He had slipped out of the shackles while Deputy Miller was distracted by the lock mechanism, a skill honed during deep cover hostage simulations. His suit, folded precisely, was hidden beneath the thin mattress. For now, he was still the vulnerable inmate, but his stance was anything but. Detective Vance's presence was loud. Alias could map the man's position by the rhythm of his labored breath, the shifting weight of his cheap service pistol, and the nervous scrape of his shoe leather. Vance was an assassin of convenience, not a professional, and his fear was palpable. "I know you're in there, boy." Vance's voice was a low, ugly growl, muffled by the suppressor he'd fitted clumsily to his sidearm. The gun barrel swung blindly, a searchlight in the gloom. "Magnus said you're asking questions you shouldn't. That means the game's over for you." Alias shifted his weight subtly, moving a single inch to his left, aligning himself with the dead space between two wall rivets. "You don't sound like a man who's here for cleanup, Vance. You sound like a man who's about to step on a landmine." Vance spun toward the sound, rage overwhelming caution. "Shut your mouth! I'm giving you a quick end. Nobody knows I'm here. It'll be ruled suicide by broken razor blade, a tragedy." The suppressed .38 fired. Pfft. The round impacted the opposite wall, missing Alias by a foot, but the brilliant, momentary muzzle flash, a white-hot corona, illuminated Alias's position in exquisite detail. In that instant, Vance saw not a helpless prisoner, but a figure of lethal control, moving with the preternatural speed of a striking viper. Alias launched forward, covering the necessary distance in a single, silent burst of motion. Vance barely registered the change before the fight was over. Alias's left hand caught Vance's wrist mid-recoil, twisting the limb just enough to dislodge the weapon, which spun across the concrete floor. Before Vance's scream could escape his throat, Alias's right arm locked around the detective's head in a vice grip, driving him backward. The impact against the steel frame of the door was a sickening crunch that stole Vance's breath and stunned his spine. Alias maintained the grip, his knee driving into the small of Vance's back, pinning him to the floor. The detective was a dead weight of panic and pain. "I'm not a kid, Vance. I'm not a junkie. I'm not the problem." Elias's voice was a deep, gravelly whisper that cut through the silence. "You are, and you've just committed an armed assault on a federal officer. That's a life sentence, even in Fairchild's court." "You're bluffing. You're nobody." Vance strained, his face purple. "Let's check the cards." Alias pressed a thumb hard against the pressure point where the jaw meets the neck. Vance gasped, his eyes watering uncontrollably. Alias continued. "Henry Simmons, the security guard you shot with your unregistered service weapon, woke up at the hospital tonight. He didn't ID me from my mugshot, Vance. He ID'd you. He told his wife that you were the one who pulled the trigger." The sudden, horrifying reality of the situation broke Vance. His struggles ceased. The man who had been so swaggeringly confident moments ago was reduced to a shuddering mass of flesh and fear. "No, that's a lie. He can't." "He did. And that's problem number one. Problem number two. The burner phone tucked into my waistband has been running a secure satellite broadcast since you walked in. Everything, your threat, the suppressed gunshot, your confession about the setup, is streaming live to a secure FBI server in D.C. The raid team is already 5 blocks away." Alias released the pressure point, letting Vance gasp for air. "I don't want your life, Vance. I want Fairchild's. You can take the murder rap, the federal indictment, and spend the rest of your life in a supermax prison where every inmate knows you're a cop killer. Or you can give me the last piece of the puzzle, and I'll make sure the U.S. attorney knows you cooperated." What do you want?" Vance whimpered. "The ledger," Alias insisted, the word a demand. "The Book of Sins. Where does Magnus hide his 15 years of graft? He wouldn't trust a computer. He's too old school." Vance's teeth chattered. The lake house, his private office, the safe, behind the massive portrait of his ugly wife, Beatrice." Alias nodded. "The combination. It's 04-2285. His anniversary, he thinks it's poetic." Vance coughed, his breathing shallow. "Please, you have to help me." "You made your choices a long time ago, Vance," Alias said, standing up. "Now I'm making mine." He applied a rapid, precise carotid restraint, holding the position until Vance's body went completely slack. He then stepped over the unconscious detective, retrieved his hidden suit, and walked calmly to the door, tapping the small red button on his burner phone to signal his team. Moments later, the door hissed open. Agent Miller, armed and wearing night vision, stepped through, followed by 2 tactical agents. "Alpha team secured the perimeter, boss," Miller reported. "The Lake House team confirmed the intel. They're breaching the safe now." Alias, already halfway into his tailored suit jacket, didn't look back at the prone body on the floor. "Excellent. Secure Vance. He's a material witness now, not a perp. Let's clean him up and make sure he's alive for the arraignment." "And you, boss?" Alias adjusted his tie, his reflection in the glass of the door showing the transformation from convict to predator. "I have a date in court. We're going to walk into Magnus Fairchild's Cathedral of Corruption and burn the altar." The clock on the courtroom wall read 9 a.m. Judge Magnus Fairchild, impeccable in his black robes, surveyed the gallery. The atmosphere was a volatile mix of high tension and low expectation. The press box was overflowing, smelling the sensationalism of the jewelry store killer trial. Magnus leaned into the microphone, his voice resonating with false authority. "Good morning. We are convened for the matter of the state versus alias Westmore. However, due to unforeseen and tragic circumstances, the defendant is unable to be here this morning. The court will entertain a motion to dismiss the charges due to the chamber doors at the back of the room burst inward with a shattering violence that stole the breath from the room. Alias Westmore stood framed in the doorway, no orange, no chains, just pure, controlled power in a charcoal suit, every thread screaming defiance. He looked like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company who had decided to bankrupt the opposition. Magnus's monologue died in his throat. He saw a ghost, a specter of the man he had personally ordered killed hours earlier. The blood rushed from his face, leaving the skin slack and gray beneath his silver hair. "My apologies, Your Honor," Alias said, his voice calm, yet loud enough to fill the enormous room without effort. He walked the length of the aisle, his eyes fixed on the judge. "I apologize for the tardiness. It seems the county jail staff had me slated for a permanent vacation. I requested an emergency change of venue." He approached the defense table and laid a protective hand on Gemma Barrett's shoulder. She was paralyzed, staring at him as if he were a messiah. You're in violation of court order," Magnus stammered, his hand shaking violently as it reached for the gavel. "Actually, Your Honor, I believe I am in compliance with the U.S. Code, Title 18, Section 3052, Alias countered, sitting down. "And I believe the defense's counsel, Ms. Barrett, has a preliminary motion. A motion for dismissal with prejudice, based on compelling, irrefutable evidence of a frame-up and conspiracy." Gemma finally found her voice, steadying herself on Alias's strength. She stood up, the exhaustion in her eyes replaced by a burning resolve. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss. The arrest was illegal. The evidence was planted. The entire prosecution is predicated on fraud." "Denied!" Magnus shrieked, slamming the gavel down with a furious hollow crack. "We will not be slandered. We proceed with selection. Bailiffs, arrest this man for escaping custody." Two bailiffs started to move toward Alias, their faces uncertain. "I wouldn't," Alias said, not raising his voice but somehow freezing them in place. He looked past them, toward the back of the room. "Special Agent Cross, now would be a good time." From the clerk's desk, Thalia Cross, cool and precise, pulled out her FBI badge and held it high. She wasn't smiling. "This court is under federal jurisdiction," Thalia announced. "Judge Magnus Fairchild, District Attorney Lucian Carrington, and Detective Vance, among others, are being investigated for high-level corruption and abuse of office. Judge Fairchild, your authority is hereby revoked." Magnus rose, his black robe swelling around him, a cornered viper. "This is an outrage. I demand order. I demand your badges. I am the judiciary." The back doors burst open again, and this time, it was a flood. 6 FBI agents in tactical vests swept in, cordoning off the exits and the judge's bench. The courtroom erupted into chaos, reporters shouting, spectators screaming. Alias stood up and walked toward the prosecution table. Lucian Carrington, who had been trying to shrink into his chair, suddenly bolted, lunging over the railing like a desperate animal. He didn't make it 5 feet before an FBI agent, Agent Miller, tackled him hard, pinning him to the carpet. Alias ignored the pandemonium. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out 2 items, the heavy leather-bound ledger and a sealed plastic evidence bag containing 24 pieces of clear glass. He laid the ledger on the bench in front of Magnus. "The ledger, Your Honor. The entire accounting of Oakhaven's corruption. You were so proud of your little system, you documented every payoff, including the $3 million insurance fraud claim used to frame me." Then he held up the plastic bag, letting the glass pieces catch the courtroom lights. "And this, ladies and gentlemen of the press, is the stolen merchandise, the loose diamonds listed in the police report." He tossed the sealed bag onto the bench. "I ordered an independent appraisal this morning. These are not diamonds. They are zirconium silicate. Fake, display pieces. The real theft wasn't from the jewelry store. The real theft was from the taxpayers and the innocent men you buried." Magnus looked at the glass, then at the ledger, and then back at Alias. His arrogance was finally, irrevocably broken. He began to shake, a rapid full-body tremor. Alias stepped closer to the bench, his towering presence filling Magnus's field of view. He spoke directly into the judge's face, low enough so only the judge and the nearby microphones could hear. "You took away my freedom, my reputation, and you tried to take my life, all to cover a lie," Alias stated, his voice devoid of emotion, making it colder than any rage. "You thought you were framing a mechanic? You didn't just frame the section chief of the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force, Magnus. You targeted the wrong man in the wrong state on the wrong day, and now I'm calling in the debt." Alias stepped back and addressed the entire court one last time. "Judge Fairchild, this court is no longer in session. The gavel of Oakhaven has struck its last corrupted blow." As the FBI agents moved in to secure Magnus, the judge let out a long, high-pitched scream of utter defeat and denial. He grasped for his robe, for his chair, for any vestige of his vanished authority. But they stripped him of the black cloth, revealing the expensive tailored suit beneath, the uniform of the criminal he truly was. The fall of Magnus Fairchild initiated a legal earthquake that shook the foundation of Oakhaven, reverberating across the state. The immediate fallout was chaotic, but Alias and his team, anticipating this, moved with swift surgical precision. Old cases were immediately placed under review. The men in Block D, who had once looked upon Alias with suspicion, and then with fearful respect, were now being processed for release, their corrupted convictions tossed out like trash. The silence in the jail was no longer one of fear, but of astonished hope. 3 days later, the Oakhaven auto shop was the quiet eye of the storm. Alias, having traded his bespoke suit for his familiar worker's clothes, was genuinely tuning the Chevelle's carburetor. It was the only honest work he'd done in months, and he savored the smell of high-octane fuel and hot metal. A familiar black sedan pulled up. Gemma Barrett stepped out, but she was a different woman. Her cheap suit had been replaced by a smart professional outfit, and her shoulders were no longer slumped in defeat, but squared with purpose. "The governor signed the appointment papers an hour ago," Gemma announced, her voice filled with disbelief and excitement. "Interim district attorney, me. The DA's office is half empty, the police force is in administrative quarantine, and the backlog is endless. It's a mess." "It's a clean slate," Alias corrected, stepping out from under the hood. "You fought for the truth when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. You are exactly what this town needs, Gemma. You know where the rot is. Now, you cut it out." "It's terrifying," she admitted, walking up to him. "But I'm doing it, and I'm starting by formally sealing the convictions of Fairchild, Carrington, and Vance." "Good. Don't look back." A minivan pulled into the lot, and the sight wiped the professional mask from Alias's face. Kiara Monroe and Henry Simmons emerged. Henry, leaning heavily on a cane, his face still pale, walked slowly but steadily. He wore a quiet dignity that had been absent in the hospital. Kiara approached Alias first, her eyes glistening. She didn't hug him this time. She looked at him with profound gratitude. "You gave us our lives back, Mr. Westmore," she said, her voice husky. Henry shuffled forward, offering a steady hand. "Thank you, son. You saved me twice." Alias met his grip, his own firm and steady. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Henry. We've recovered the funds. The victim compensation is set up. You and Kiara focus on healing. The financial security is permanent." Henry squeezed Alias's hand. It wasn't about the money. It was about seeing him in the dock, seeing justice. Alias nodded. That was the core of it. Not the takedown, but the restoration of faith. Alias turned to Gemma. "Keep your integrity, D.A. Barrett. Don't let the office change you." "Never," she vowed. He climbed into the Chevelle. Thalia Cross was already waiting, the sleek, black professionalism of her FBI credentials a stark contrast to the old muscle car. "Report from D.C., Thalia said, pulling a file from a thin briefcase. "They want you to return for the Director's Medal of Valor." Alias started the engine, the aggressive rumble filling the air. "Tell them to mail it. We have a bigger problem." He handed Thalia the file. It contained a single piece of paper, a newspaper clipping about a local politician in a small southern town who had recently passed a contentious zoning bill benefiting his private firm. "Mayor in Alabama, skimming school budgets," Alias read aloud, a wry smile touching his lips. "Let's go show him that the cost of tuition just went up." With a final wave to Gemma, Kiara, and Henry, the three figures representing the justice he had served, Alias Westmore hit the gas. The Chevelle peeled out onto the highway, a cloud of dust marking its passage, leaving Oakhaven to begin its long, slow path toward rehabilitation. He was done being the victim. He was back to being the force of reckoning. The story of Alias Westmore and Judge Fairchild isn't just a drama, it's a warning. It reminds us that power, when unchecked, becomes a cancer. Magnus Fairchild believed his position put him above the law, but he forgot that the law is not a person, it is a principle. Justice may be blind, but it is not deaf. It heard the cries of the innocent in Oakhaven. It took a man willing to become a victim to expose the predator. In the end, the gavel didn't belong to Magnus. It belonged to the truth. And when the truth strikes, it strikes harder than any judge's ruling. Did you enjoy this story of ultimate justice? If you want to see more stories where the corrupt get exactly what they deserve, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode of The Gavel of Retribution. Comment below. Justice served, if you think Magnus got what was coming to him.